sense that you cannot work with it. If you are getting improvement, and maybe we'll have, I doubt it, I was going to say maybe we'll have the good luck here. People come in here, and 6 months ago they had hepatitis, infectious hepatitis. And they're having the time of their life complaining about how they never got out of that hepatitis. And as you go into that abdomen, palpating it, you realize that they're right. Their liver is halfway down to their pubes. And you go through your first hour, and you go back and you take a look at that abdomen, and lo and behold, the liver's up where it belongs. It's the same as some of you saw with that art the other day. But you are working through the fascial body. It is the way you relate the fascia and the fascial planes and the fascial strains that then reorganizes what's going on inside them, what's going on next to them, etc., etc. I know, lots of you don't believe a word of it. That's all right. So now, we take in that first hour, and we are dealing with the outermost, the most superficial fascial layer. And because all fascial layers are connected, you're going to be dealing with the fascial layers of the things that are giving you the problem. That liver that I've just been talking about. And the first hour was a demonstration of just exactly this. You were getting those fascial, that outside fascia reorganized, repatterned. And you knew that you were repatterning it correctly if you got the pelvic basin horizontal or approached it. And you went into your repatterning with the idea of making that pelvic basin horizontal, because this was the position where it worked. And so the first thing you did was to get the thorax climbing off that pelvic basin, because there were all kinds of communications between the pelvic basin and the rib cage. Communications in the sense of muscles, in the sense of fascia, sense of tendons, always in the sense of mesoderm. And you had the good luck, the sheer unadulterated good luck, to completely change the respiratory pattern as you did this. It wasn't what you started out to do. What you started out to do was to free the pelvis of its burden from the rib cage. And as you did this, lo and behold, the rib cage got to working. And after you got the rib cage to working, the diaphragm is part of it, and you go down and you get the legs. You get them independent of the pelvis so that they are not dragging on the pelvis. Walk down the streets of any town with the new eyes that you have in your head and see what the 40 and the 50 and the 60 and the 70-year-olds are dragging around with them. Not a clean-cut leg in the whole outfit. And every one of those legs is pulling that pelvis along, pushing it, heaving it, hauling it. This is what you're trying to obviate, so that the pelvis can get its job done. And in the first hour you worked only as far as the knees, as you remember. Not because this finished the job, but because there's a limit to what you can impose on any individual. Now, some of these individuals gave you a lot of emotional excretion, shall I say, in this first hour. But most of them don't. Most of them come to other hours, which releases the emotion. Some few of them, yes, will get it in the first hour. You rarely get, very rarely do you get reactions in the first hour. Kind of thing where the guy comes back and he says, oh, I've been feeling terrible since that first hour. Every once in a while you do. Every once in a while you hear, well, for the first 24 hours after that, I was really feeling awful. But I feel good now. I wouldn't say this happens. I wouldn't say it happens that you get a reaction in the first hour once in 500 cases. Mostly the first hour is a joyous hour. They feel so good they cry with joy sometimes. Because all of a sudden, the individual who in his heart of hearts feels there is no hope for him, he's always going to be this way. He's always going to have to drag this around with him. All of a sudden, he gets a vision that maybe he doesn't. And it is such a release on his nervous and emotional system as a whole that he's actually crying before he leaves the room or after. And you see, you get all kinds of responses from that nervous system as you get this tremendous feeling of, well, maybe it happens. Our friend Frank here wrote me a letter after his first hour. It was more or less of a stinking letter when you came right down to it. He said he wanted me to know he was in the depths of fear and it was all my fault. He was way down at the bottom and it was all my fault. He wasn't really interested in sitting up straighter. He wasn't interested in his standing, really. He was interested in getting rid of this bladder situation. He was interested in getting healing on this sex situation. Now, you hear what I'm saying? Not mesoderm. They're not willing to accept the mesoderm. They're looking for the other things. And this you can't promise them. And this I never promised him. And in the presence of the whole other class, I talked to Frank. And I made minimal promises. I said, I can make you operate with a lot less expenditure of energy, and therefore you'll be able to operate better. And I don't think any of you don't believe that I'm carrying that out. But this wasn't the way Frank saw it. And he sat down and he wrote me a 2-page letter, 2 large pages, in which he said that I had given him this hope, and this was a very cruel thing, and I had done it because I was trying to impress the MDs. Yesterday before he left, he said, I'm being impressed. I said, don't bother, this is garden variety around here. You don't have to be impressed. But you see, this is the emotional drainage coming off the man. It's not the rational man, it's the irrational man who chose to irrationalize by writing me this letter of the stuff that was coming out. And you have to be able to take this purely objectively and see it as purgation. It's not always easy. So that does the first hour. You have organized each area on center of gravity, on top of center of gravity, in order to minimize the moment of rotation of these various areas that drag them off the stable, balanced position. And now you have to begin to take that chunk of man that you've organized, and you're going to have to put him on the earth because that's where he lives. And so in the second hour, as you saw yesterday, you have to begin putting feet and legs under the piece of man that you worked out in the first hour. And in order to do this, you are now going to have to begin to study anatomy. This is real tough. And you're going to have to get your anatomy books. And you're going to have to look at what it is that gets stuck, that gives them. The broken down arches, the calves that won't work, the knees that are crooked, the ankles that aren't ankles, the feet that are not under the legs, the fibula that are halfway around the tibia, etc., etc. And you have to go back and you have to get your anatomy books out and really take a look at this. Now, one of the best of these books is this Lilith. Well, yeah. In the sense that it is highly simplified and highly misleading. One of the things that you have to realize as you start dealing with the foot is that there are two levels of operation in the foot. And you see the difference in color here? The one color is attached to the 3 inner toes. The other color is attached to the 2 outer toes. The yellow sits on top of the gray. Now get reality on this. If you can lift the gray, you've got it made. If you lift the yellow, you've thrown it away. If you lift on the inner arch, you've thrown it away. If you lift on the outer arch, you've got it made. It's that simple. Only some of you that were working didn't find it so. Even the ancients knew this. Why I had the nerve to put in even, I don't know. The ancients knew this. The Greeks, when they wanted to represent the principle of transportation, the principle of getting around, represented a young man with wings on the side, the outside of his heels. They were saying, not that they thought there was a god that came around with wings on the side of his feet at all. They were saying that the principle of transportation, of getting around fast and satisfactorily, consisted in walking as though you had wings on the side of your feet. It still is the same. And it's not wings on the inside of the feet. And those of you who have been through the medical bit of taking flat-footed children and making them walk on inclined boards like this.
And giving them marbles to pick up on their toes.
Well, yeah, it depends on how they pick them up. You see, again, it isn't what you do, it's how you do it now. Mm-hmm. And somebody has to supervise the doing to see that it's done properly. Now, as you pick it up right then, you let the outside of your foot go down.
And we have to sit straight and bring it up. Like that.
Yeah, always letting the outside of your foot go down. Now you see, what was happening was that these boys were brought up with Aristotle. For every cause there is an effect. And of course you can look at the effect. And the effect is that if you want to get the inner arch up, you lift the inner arch. You don't. You lift the outer arch. This is one of the things that this second hour is about. How do you lift the outer arch? And why isn't the outer arch lifted anyway? Well, the answer to that is very easy. The answer to that lies in the development of a child whose undeveloped legs, as he's born and as he lives for a whole year, year and a half or so, is always this way. It isn't until that child starts to walk that other things begin to happen. And with too many children, not enough other things happen. And flat feet are not in the feet. Flat feet are in the shins. They are where and how the muscles of the shins relate. And the place to go for your flat feet is not into the feet, but into the shins. And there you organize the muscles that control the feet. Now, what are you trying to do there? And what is your goal? And your goal is to establish an ankle which acts as though it were horizontal. And you do that by getting an appropriate relation between the outer part, the outer side of the foot, and the inner side, by establishing this thing. Now, as soon as you do that, and many of you, as you were experimenting yesterday, found this out, you begin to find out that as you make a demand on your foot to move, what is really moving is your leg. And if it isn't really moving, you don't have an appropriate ankle, you don't have a balance of the leg, you don't have a balance of the foot. So how can you get there? Well, near an amazing lot of joints in the body, and certainly the joints in the arms and the joints in the legs, you have muscles held into positions by retinaculi. And retinaculi is our good old fascia again, under a different name. And you've got to go in and get those retinaculi sufficiently stretched and organized and elastic that you can get some movement under them. Those retinaculi are there to hold the strings of the muscles in place. It's as simple as that. And if the string is pulled so tightly and can't be moved and can't be loosened and nothing can happen, the muscles can't move. Now, as a kid grows up, walking on the outside of his feet, and those of you who have kids, go back and look at those kids sitting in a chair, doing anything, sitting like this, always on the outside of their feet, always on the outside of their feet. You see, they have never brought it around. It has never been presented to the child or to the individual that it's a goal to bring it around. No one says this. If it happens that the kid is a good mesomorph, maybe you bring it around. But it's just as likely to not happen. And Beverly is going to go home and she's going to have an awful time because she's got 3 of them in her house. And every one of them is walking on the outside of his feet. They'll even play walking on the outside of their feet. You all know it.
Is that one of the reasons why Gail is so tripping over her feet all the time?
Yeah, but it's not the only. I mean, the anchorage is higher. Mm-hmm. But certainly you'll find it there. So that as they walk consistently on the outside of their feet, these retinaculi take on the job that they've got to do of holding those muscles in a good place to walk on the outside of their feet. And then the pattern is anchored. And then within the pattern, you get the change of the individual structure, of the individual chemistry of the structure, of the failure of circulation through the structure, etc., etc. And now, all at once, you have a totally inadequate foot. And maybe you have a foot that no longer really sits under that ankle. This is almost one of those feet that doesn't sit under that ankle. And here it's a move. The foot can't get like that if it's sitting under the leg bone. There are a couple of real pretty pictures of there. Now, just as soon as you turn a foot out, now here you are again. Here's this guy who undoubtedly was a good old athlete going up on his toes to be a model of this picture. Where's his weight? On the outside of his foot. Where else would you expect it to be? Does his weight go through his ankles? Heavens no, he doesn't want it to. It doesn't occur to him that there's any point to this. Every picture of every foot in this book is of an everted foot. How do you get an everted foot? Consistently everted foot. You get it by shortening on the outside, lengthening on the inside, and all of this is then glued into place with the two retinaculum, the one above the ankle and the one on the foot itself. And there it is. This stuff. There is one. Well, that's one of them. That is a two one. Now you see, these boys recognize the fact. These boys recognize the fact that the lines of force through a foot should be like this. But they don't recognize the fact that the minute you evert a foot and turn it outward, you don't have that. And you can't have that. And the guy that wrote this book had all the evidence spread out right in front of his nose. He knew how to think about it, but he didn't know how to see about it. He had all the evidence laid there that you have in this class and we'll be working with. And he didn't put it together. And he turned out these atrocities of feet. And he turned out the assumption that every foot has to be turned out. Now, actually, what you are going to have to do in order to get those feet back is to get every one of those muscles individualized, each one doing its own thing, each one sliding across its neighbor when it needs to, each one balanced in tone, and this means balanced in chemistry and balanced in energy. And then you've got something to stand on. Now the actual practical bit here is to start with the retinaculi, because that's where the things get the worst glued up. No, not the worst. Anyway, it's practical, for the most part. Sometimes you'll see me starting further up on the leg. Sometimes you will feel that you want to start further up on the leg. The major problem is there. Sometimes it's smart to go into the major problem where the major problem is. Sometimes it isn't that smart at all. Sometimes the way to start is more often than not, the way to attack a major problem is from the periphery. And so if you have a great big problem here, and you get down here and start organizing the feet through moving it, but through, where is Mark? Yeah. Listen. But through holding the muscle as near to possible to the position where it should be in terms of its structure, you will get it moving. And you start at the periphery and you follow the first law of Rolf, that you have to get it toward where it belongs, and there you have to demand that it moves. And feet show you as more clearly, I think, than any other thing in the body, how muscles go askew. A bunion, for instance. All those muscles that are dealing with that great toe have gone off, have moved off, 1/4 of an inch, sometimes even 1/2 an inch, off where they belong. And this is what has pulled the toe. But also, in a bunion, the thing that starts the problem is that the muscle that should just cross the joint there has slipped. That slips first. And then everything else slips to try to hold the situation together so the guy can continue to walk. And in the case of a bunion, what you have to do is to just literally keep putting those things back where they belong. And all of a sudden, there is no more bunion. This doesn't happen in 1 hour, but it often happens in the first 10. If the bunion is a great big problem to the person, and so the processor puts a lot of attention on it. I mean, he goes there in the 2nd hour and he takes a look at it as he goes by in the 4th, and takes a look at it in the 6th, and he takes a look at it in the 8th. And lo and behold, by the 10th hour, that bunion will be an empty envelope. And in a month or so, that empty envelope will have refitted itself on the underlying structure. And along about that time, the guy who has told you the day he first came in when his feet were killing him, and he's told you, I will have you advertised from one coast of this land to the other, if you can cure that, when you tell him that, I don't want you to fix that up. He goes off and he's forgotten all about it. It's real good. Always know that the guy who says he will talk about you from one coast to the other, you will never hear from him. Always know that. This is part of what you learn. But you see, the funny part of it is that all these guys and these gals think that if you can straighten out one little bone on their big toe, that is the most important of anything you could possibly do for them. And the fact that in the meantime you're going to really get their lumbars organized, that means nothing. So you can expect to be people without honor in your nearest country. But now come and look at those diagrams and see what has happened, demonstrations that I've ever seen of its kind. Let us remember that gal Sharon, that pretty gal Sharon. Before the hour yesterday, she stood up there and our lumbars were terrible. You all would remember it. And her legs were quite good. And when Owen got through working on her legs, she stood up and her lumbars were good and her legs were awful. By and by today, we'll take a look and see what happened today. But you see, it very rarely happens that you have the opportunity to see anything that is as clean-cut as that demonstration on Sharon yesterday. Very rarely. So you're all in luck. You're all in luck anyway, the other things that you see here. Now, what happens that the back is short? We have worked on the front. And to the extent in the first hour that you weren't too lazy, you worked on the back. But most of you knew that your hands were hurting like the dickens, that you couldn't stand it another second, that it was easier to work on the front than it was to get in under the back. And so you worked on the front and kind of prayed to God that the back would come along, and the back didn't, and your prayers weren't that good. So, now they stand up at the beginning of the second hour, and you see that your prayers have been no good. And you see that the muscles, which Don insists that you look at this way, those extensors, those vertical extensors of the back, and which I insist that you look at this way, and this way, schematized, of course. Yeah, schematized. You see that those things are still all glued down. And you see that some places they're glued worse than other places. And some areas, perhaps between the 4th and the 6th dorsal, they're much too short. And the rib, therefore, has jumped out, or maybe the rib has jumped out as a result of your knocking against the edge of something sometime. And therefore, the extensors have become glued short. You find an infinite variation in pattern on those extensors, and you have got to get it back to one pattern. This is the mentally troublesome image around here. You've got to get all these people conforming to one pattern. And the neurotics among them don't want to do it. And they'll fight you every step of the way. You watch. But now let's get back here. How do those muscles get out of place other than by accident? Well, what I'm about to describe is still an accident in life. It's a question of you trying to do something that is too heavy for your equipment. You do something in a flexed position. Metaphor, the simile I usually use is the family that's cleaning out the attic, and Mama wants the trunk full of books from this corner over to that corner because she wants to wash the floor under there, and then she's going to put some linoleum under there because it's mopping up the floor. So Papa has to drag that trunk full of books diagonally across the attic floor. And he starts to drag it. And it's about all he can handle. Now what's he doing? If you will simulate that right now in that kind of a muscular movement, you will feel that the most lateral of the muscles is moving more lateral. And very few of you have feeling enough to be able to say the most lateral fiber of the most lateral muscle is moving lateral. And while he is putting this terrific effort and energy into doing this, he is putting that amount of effort and energy in moving that lateral muscle lateral. Now, if he's in good shape, and at age 25, as I told you, when he has the most energy, the chances are that when he stops pulling that trunk, those lateral muscles will move back medial to where they belong. But comes the day when he no longer has that level of energy, or maybe he never had it in the beginning, and he has pulled that muscle lateral, and it is not able to go medial. He has pulled it past the point of elasticity. And now it's out there. Its metabolism is interfered with. And there it is. And he feels vaguely, well, I overdid it yesterday. I shouldn't have overdone it. I hope I get out of this. Now comes next week. And Mama has now fixed up the corner. And now she wants the whole trunk of books back. So he obediently goes up there and he starts pulling that trunk of books. And what happens? Well, I just don't know why this seems so much heavier than last time. But damn it all, I did this last week and I can do it this week. Come on. Now what happens then? He pulls the next set of fibrils lateral. And they are now past the limit of elasticity. And they can no longer spring medial again. And so they get themselves glued down. They get themselves glued down lateral to their normal position. Because when things get injured, the actual mechanism and process of injury and of healing, restoration of an injury, is somehow an exuding of material which, as it dries, forms crusts and glues. And so now he has some of those fibers glued over there. Well, moving that trunk of books isn't all the hard work he's going to have to do in his life. But he now is literally, he has a perverted muscular pattern with which to do his work. And every time he does a real heavy job, he is repeating this pattern within limits. And by, you see these muscles literally moved lateral of their position and anchored there. Now, what do you see when you look at that man? You see an over-broad back and an over-short back and an over-thick back. The nearest approach to it here is Mark. And Mac one time had it, I think.
Yeah.
You had it all right, but you're not too badly off right now. And the neighbors say, oh, just look at John. He's so big and strong and sturdy and healthy. I wish my Ned was like that. And this is the way the myths get going. Now, how do you lengthen it? And if I put every one of you up with a back that you needed to lengthen, I am very sure that all you newcomers would start lengthening the back. But you don't lengthen it by lengthening it. You lengthen it by crossing it. What's that going to get you? That's going to get you your muscles further diverted, isn't it?
Get me in a position where I can go in like
That's a bright boy. I bet he's fooled many a teacher. The only trouble is I had two bright kids of my own. So anyway, you bring those, you cross those muscles. And this is the thing which in practice gives you the length. And as you bring those muscles in, you see the spine lengthen. And a blind man can see it with his cane, as an old teacher of mine used to say. And it's not myth, and it's not theory, and it's not maybe it'll do it 6 months from now, and it's not if I do this to you a year from now, you'll be feeling fine. You do that, and you see the spine lengthen and free and get movement in it. Because a long spine moves. The spine that isn't moving has been shortened one way or another. And everybody, I shouldn't tell you this, I should make you see this. Everybody that you have ever seen that is in trouble of any sort, whether it be a mere postural problem, or a problem like Frank's, or a problem like, even like drivers, everybody will be too short. The first thing, the second thing, the third thing, the last thing, the 10th thing, the 20th thing, the 100th thing that you got to do with the body you're working on is make it long. But it's got to be long all over, and not in the back. Only. I had a very interesting experience one time several years ago. I taught a class in Texas, and in those days, I didn't have this system of making people sit through and watch through the whole deal. But I took people like osteopaths and assumed that I could teach them immediately because they had the whole background. And I couldn't do it. They weren't expecting as complicated a teaching as this. It never occurred to them that maybe they should have notes. Nothing occurred to them except they'd spent some money and they were going to sit there and listen to it. So they sat there and they listened to it, and there were 3 of them that tried to work on each other. 2 of them were a man and wife and a very close friend. And so when I got out of the town, they were all balled up. And the one thing they remembered was how good it felt to have somebody lengthening their back as they went down like this. And so they'd meet at least once a week and possibly twice a week to talk about structural integration, which they'd completely forgotten. And what came out of it was that all 3 of them landed up by just lengthening backs. And about a year after, somebody called me up and said, would you please come down here? We've gotten to be a very funny-looking bunch, and now we're getting all kinds of new symptoms. They didn't tell me why. So needless to remark, I stopped in Texas. And I took one look at him, and I knew why. You can't do it that way. But you see, all of these orthodox methodologies think you can. If you give them one treatment and that's good, you give them 10 treatments of the same dose and that's better, and you give them 100 treatments or a treatment every day and that cures them. Yeah, it does, by putting in a new symptom, by shifting the strain, and therefore the symptom. So, the moral is that you have to, the moral always is, that you have to visualize where you're going to want your stuff, and this is the object of those first 10 boring hours when you sit around here watching things change. And in the second 10 hours, you've got to get your flesh material there and see that you balance it. And this is not a picture. It doesn't, at least. Okay.
Ida?
Sir.
Very simple thing about legs, which I just thought of. My speedometer cable broke in the car a couple of weeks ago. And
So you walked all the way?
Yeah, I had to walk all the way. I took it down to the shop and asked them, why did it break? And it broke at its base when it went into the gearbox. And so I thought, well, Father says there's something in there grinding it, and I said, I don't think so. So I take it down, and he says, well, yes, if it breaks down there, that means it's locked at its origin. And that's what I think we're talking about in the feet, is that the inside, the little rotary which turns, locked.
Right.
And it broke 4 feet away at
And
the
the
greatest
mechanic-
point of strain.
And the mechanic knows that, and it doesn't surprise him. But the doctor doesn't know that, and it does surprise him. You see, this is the funny part of our culture. It really is the funny part of our culture. Our automobile mechanics and our airplane mechanics know so much about mechanics that the guy that studies body mechanics never thinks about it. How about that coffee?
What they're doing is important. Make anything out of it,
But that isn't your dish.
I know something about those things, but I don't know the circumstances under which the tests were taken, and
Where did you? Oh, you
I'll
said
talk to
you got it
about
from
that.
Peter.
Yeah, I got it from Peter. He had it in his hand yesterday morning. I said, "What's that?" So I said, "I'll just take it."
One more man on my list.
Oh no, he was.
He was on his way here? Could you prove it?
I can't say anything to him, he's my Rolfer. We have a tape also that Judy made for us Friday night. It's about
There was
12, 15 minutes
that's
long.
what I got from
Judy
Sorry,
made Friday night?
Yeah. We went down to visit with
The one you asked Julian to do on the cassette.
Oh, Julia. I thought you meant Judy
No,
Judy
Julia.
Aston. Oh, yeah, is it any good?
I didn't hear it yet.
Yes, it's more specific and better than the one we heard. So sometime if you'd like to listen.
I would indeed. I would indeed. And whoever made me up that nice room, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, sir.
You're very
That's really lovely. And I feel really at home now here for the first time since I've lived here. That's, oh, never mind how many years. 40 maybe, seems like sometimes. Okay, let's get to work. Trouble is there are too many excitements this morning. Does anybody think it might be a good idea to review what happened last week?
Yes.
Let me ask you, Joel, to start in. Mark, to start in.
With the second session?
No, you start right back at the beginning. I want to see whether you've gotten yourself really mentally organized with it or not.
Well, the first Rolfing session begins with a,
Now, never mind what it begins with. I'm not interested with what that's what I gave you fits about last time. Supposing somebody comes up to you and says, what is Rolfing? What is structural integration? What are you going to answer them?
What happens in structural integration is that the body is restructured by a method of mostly of working with the fascia, superficial and deep fascia. It begins with the superficial. What happens is this fascia is either stretched or broken or somehow moved in some way to give the muscles underneath breathing room, so to speak.
You mean we stretch them or we break them?
Well,
God help us, send for the cops.
Well, there was work on the, you talked about burn, having a feeling of something burning down around
That's
the
right.
ankle, which was something happening to the fascia.
God knows it
being
mustn't be
stretched.
broken.
Okay, not the same.
I know it mustn't be broken, and you better know it mustn't be
Well,
broken.
would the fibers be loosened?
No.
Something happens to the superficial fascia.
Something does.
Okay.
The man looks different, so something must have happened to the superficial fascia. Because if nothing happens to the superficial fascia, the man's not going to look different. Has this occurred to you?
Yes. Yes. Working with that, well, I don't know exactly how to name it. I mean, if you wouldn't call it stretching the fascia or loosening.
The fascia gets stretched. This is all right.
Good. The fascia is stretched. That's what happens. And
Is that the only
yeah.
that the only way you designate it, that the fascia is stretched?
I mean, speaking of the fascia, just the
Yeah.
fascia. Oh no, it's not an isolated process because I mean you can't. Though we work with fascia, let's say mainly, your hands touch the bones and they touch the skin and other structures involved. So a cornerstone is that. the
Your hands
fascia-
ever touched the bones?
Well, you can feel bones. They might be covered with fascia and muscle, but you can feel the bones.
Yeah, they sure are covered with a great many things, or the undertaker is catching up with you darn fast.
Well, okay. In order to structurally reintegrate the body then, we work with these fascia, basically fascia, perhaps some muscle. It starts with,
What's the difference between fascia and muscle, Mark?
well, let's see. Fascia is sort of like, is a fibrous type tissue.
What's it made of?
It's made of cells and
What does it consist of, I should say?
it consists of fibers excreted, a matrix, and fibers of different types that are excreted by cells, either elastic fibers or,
They are excreted by cells?
well, let's say they're made by the influence of the cells. They're not excreted by the cells.
They sure aren't.
But the cells control that.
No, they don't. The fiber is a cell in itself. Oh. Okay, you've been on the hook long enough. Let me get you on the hook there. See what happens. Well, how would you answer what is structural integration?
I'd say it's a technique for aligning the body so that it functions better directly.
That's right.
And in order to do this, the superficial fascia of the body is what I'm groping for is words to describe the fascia that gets stuck.
Yes,
The fascia themselves get stuck together
yeah.
and drag on the muscles and the
Yes.
other parts of the body.
What's the difference between muscles and fascia? See if you can
Obviously,
take that.
fascia are the coverings of the muscles, and the muscles are the
That's right, the
working
contents of the fascia, the contents of some fascia enwraps muscle cells. Not all fascia. Some fascia acts simply as the things that hold them together, that hold the man together. But all muscles are enwrapped in fascial envelopes. Okay? All right, now going on from there, what do you do with that fascia?
Well, you stretch the fascia
Yeah?
that is stuck
What's the point of stretching it? To get it unstuck?
to get it unstuck so that it will move, will allow free movement of the muscles. And
All right, now how do you do this? Do you want to take that question, Jim? You two see if you can play a duet.
Well, you begin by applying energy
Yeah?
at certain areas.
Energy how?
Through your hands.
That's right. Through pressure of your hands, you are actually applying energy. Yeah, I wanted to know whether you people had that concept. Right. And then?
Well, there's also seems to be a chemical process involved with the energy. Converting
Yeah,
the-
this isn't really your bit right yet. Go on. You're doing all right.
The energy at various points, loosening the fascia, allows the organism and the muscles to get themselves back into a balanced position.
That's right. And your effort is made to bring the muscle and the fascia,
Where
or should I say the fascia and the muscle, into the place where it belongs in terms of the least energy being needed for the thing to do its work. In other words, speaking loosely, the right place. If the muscle or the fascia has moved off its appropriate position, precise position, you bring it back toward that position, and then you demand of it that it work, because hands will never do the job. Now, I cannot underscore that too much, because every masseur, every chiropractor, every osteopath thinks that by manipulation he can do some job. I'm not going to say at this moment cure, though most of them don't really believe they can cure, and God knows they can't by that method. But it is only through the work, the literal movement of the individual concerned that you get appropriate rebalancing of those muscles. You help the individual. You do not and you cannot do it. Now, is there anybody in this room that doesn't hear? Because this is an extremely important concept. And this is the thing that takes this work out from the group of real therapies. I don't call this a therapy. I call this a development. I call it an education, an educare, a leading out, an evolution. Anything you like, but not healing, not therapy. And in getting yourself, your 2 feet firmly fixed on this idea, you are taking yourself out once and for all, and I mean for all, from the domain of the medics whose job is therapy. And see that you stay out of there. And see that you don't behave so that other people get the notion that there is therapy going on, that there is repair going on, that there is medical healing going on. The acute situation is the job of the medic. The chronic situation is your job, because chronic situations all have to do with improper structure. All chronic situations, as far as I have ever been able to think, and I've done a lot of thinking about it, all chronic situations involve a problem with gravity, a distortion from the point of balance, a permanent distortion from the point of balance that cannot through your mind be remedied. And that is the chronic situation. If you can remedy it simply by taking thought, I don't think it's a chronic situation. Now, I'm willing to hear a lot of argument from a lot of you on this. And if we do get into an argument about it, probably we'll get it further clarified. But you realize that when I begin to sit down and talk about this, there's nobody with whom I can really refine the concept. I have to just go off in a corner and say, let it be, and it is, so to speak. And this isn't the way, really, to get out a well-tempered instrument. Well, anyway, So that this is structural integration, and you two have done a fairly good job of defining it. Now, where do you start? And give me a big concept. I don't want you to put your hand on his ribs.
Well, the idea is to eventually get the pelvis horizontal.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
It's not where you start.
So you begin with the thorax, trying to free that from.
You're still not giving me the answer that I'm looking for. You're all right. I'm not complaining too bitterly, but I'm trying to present a picture. You know what I want to say, Ed? You start on the outside. You start with the superficial fascia. You always start on the outside. You always start on the outside and work toward the center. Whether it's on the outside of the body going toward the center, or whether it's on the end of the limbs going toward the trunk, you always start at the periphery. Now, here again is a very fundamental difference between this and other systems. Other manipulative systems will tell you when you find the cause and you go straight to that cause and you fix the cause. Isn't that logical? And I say, no, it isn't. And so I can get myself thrown out not only from the medics, I can get the osteopaths to throw me out, and I can get the chiropractors to throw me out, and I can get thrown out, period.
There are easier ways than this to do it. You go the hard way.
There used to be a saying in our family, there are two ways to do things, the right way and the Deverly way. Well, at any rate, this is the story. You see, you start on the outside, and that which is on the outside is the superficial fascia. So you have to start by loosening the superficial fascia in order to give yourself room enough to start reorganizing body units. Now, I don't think that I stressed enough in this class the fact that if you have an unhappy situation in an organ, you will have it reflected into pain and tension in the overlying fascia. I wasn't the one that discovered this. That was discovered a long time ago. Was that Head's Law?
Head's Law.
Yeah.
What is his name?
Head, H-E-A-D, and he lived in the last half of the 19th century, the 80s, the 90s. He lived and worked. He was a physiologist mostly, as I remember. I don't think he was an American. I think he was an Englishman.
As I recall, this had to do with close central connection to the spinal cord,
That's
reflex
right.
arcs.
That's
where it,
right. Now, tell me something. You seem to know more about this guy than you're perfectly right. And when I went to try to check what I was trying to write in my book and to get the reference for it, I couldn't find it. I thought Head was responsible for a law which said, approximately, if you have two muscular members of a unit, a motor unit, and one of them is tighter, thicker, less mobile than the other, and you put in energy, the one that is tighter and thicker tightens first and tightens most. At least the energy goes into that one, further constricts it, further shortens it, thereby increasing the imbalance between the two members. Now, I could swear that that was Head's Law, but I cannot find the reference to it, and I really worked on that.
There were two laws that they taught us, and I'm confused between the two. One is Head's Law, one is Wolff's Law. They always kind of talked them together. I do not remember what you're speaking of here. What I remember was something about two organs, or two...
responds the first and attempts to respond the most, but it can't. In terms of energy, more energy goes into that member.
That's not Head's law, I don't think.
All right, what is whose law?
I'll see if I can find
If
that
you
out.
can find it, I'll be very much obliged to you.
Okay, though you're talking about two agonists, right?
Two agonists, yes.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Two agonists. And you see, these things get stuck together too, and this also changes the whole energy pattern of either one or two of those agonists. And you see, the whole pattern is changed in terms of when you add a stimulus and energy, stimulus from the nervous system and so forth, you get this kind of a response. Now, this becomes very basically important to you people. Basically important to you people. Because what you are learning here is that a body, to function appropriately, to function normally, not to function averagely, but to function normally, these members, these agonists and antagonists, must be balanced. Now, the minute you get the kind of situation that I have just outlined to you, you have a completely unbalanced situation. Now, you people have all watched people walking in this room. And you have watched them, for instance, throw their leg around instead of walking straight forward. Now look at that situation. What is happening? The answer is that you have two agonists, and one of them is too short. And as you send the message of, I want this leg to move, the one that's too short picks it up first and tries to work. But it cannot contract that much, because it's already contracted. Responds the first and attempts to respond the most, but it can't. In terms of energy, more energy goes into that member.
That's not Head's law, I don't think.
All right, what is whose law?
I'll see if I can find
If
that
you
out.
can find it, I'll be very much obliged to you.
Okay, though you're talking about two agonists, right?
Two agonists, yes.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Two agonists. And you see, these things get stuck together too, and this also changes the whole energy pattern of either one or two of those agonists. And you see, the whole pattern is changed in terms of when you add a stimulus and energy, stimulus from the nervous system and so forth, you get this kind of a response. Now, this becomes very basically important to you people. Basically important to you people. Because what you are learning here is that a body, to function appropriately, to function normally, not to function averagely, but to function normally, these members, these agonists and antagonists, must be balanced. Now, the minute you get the kind of situation that I have just outlined to you, you have a completely unbalanced situation. Now, you people have all watched people walking in this room. And you have watched them, for instance, throw their leg around instead of walking straight forward. Now look at that situation. What is happening? The answer is that you have two agonists, and one of them is too short. And as you send the message of, I want this leg to move, the one that's too short picks it up first and tries to work. But it cannot contract that much, because it's already contracted. And it's already as tight as a walnut. And so it has to throw its leg around. It can't go through. The same thing is true of arms or heads or necks or what have you. And this is the mechanism whereby you get the characteristic patterns that distinguish a man. You say, that can't be John. I can't see whether it's John, but he's not walking like John. And this is what you're really talking about.
That's why the body can't cure itself. That's why somebody.
right.
That's why
absolutely
somebody by
right.
himself will not get better.
He
Will
can't
not-
do it.
Will not integrate
That's
himself.
right.
Because
That's exactly what
every time he moves by himself, he will move that
That's
muscle
right.
which is tightest.
That's right. And the additional thing there is a psychological thing. As far as he knows, this is normal. And he can't figure his way into anything else. He sees that John Jones does it differently. But oh hell, it's funny that John Jones does it differently, because this is the normal right way to do it. It's my way. unless the thing is giving him a great deal of trouble, and unless he realizes that he's doing a lot less well than John Jones does, then he begins to look at it. But even then, it doesn't occur to him that this can be wrong. He then goes into all kinds of complicated misunderstandings because this saves face for him to himself. Oh, my adrenal isn't working, or genetically I have this, that, or the other thing. And if it's complicated enough, he doesn't have to blush for himself, so to speak. Whereas if you give him a little simple answer like this is just more than he can handle. But you see, this is what you are trying to get those muscles to move in their appropriate pattern for. Because if you can get them there, they will move independently. And in order to get them there, you have to make them move independently. This is a very circular situation. And there's no simplicity in it. It's very simple, but there's no simplicity in it. I mean, the concept is simple and straightforward and easy to understand. But always when you're dealing, and this is what I'm trying to say to you, always when you're dealing with a biological situation, you've got to go around this way. There is no going in that way. You go in that way and you destroy what you're looking for. Always the approach must be circular. And the way you see it in your own approach to bodies, as taught here, is that you start at the outside, at the periphery, and you work in. Gee, we didn't get very far with that first hour, did we now? Now, tell me the goal of the first hour.
Some more detail about the first hour now.
Tell me the goal of the
The
first
goal of
hour.
the first hour is to free the pelvis from the legs and the thorax.
That's right, to free the pelvis, to get the pelvis free enough to approach nearer to the horizontal. And you cannot do this in 1 hour, but you can start working. Now, realize that if a pelvis is not horizontal, the vertical line will be wrong too. Realize that if the pelvis is not horizontal, there will be inevitably a rotation in the pelvis. There has to be a rotation in the pelvis. So once again I say to you, the whole idea of this thing is simple. But the execution requires a great deal of subtlety. So you start by disengaging the thorax. And as you disengage that thorax, you get that great big chunk of velvet for free, that respiratory activity. And this means that to every place that you succeed in getting more circulation going through, and all of you have seen people lying on this floor and you're working on their knees or you're working on their hamstrings and their whole head is just completely flushed out with an entire change of circulation. And it means that that blood that has gone there is of a different quality and a different chemistry. It is carrying a degree of oxygen which is different. And which is going to act as a food, as to remove waste, etc., etc. So that you have a very great asset there that just comes to you out of the blue. Now when you get down to the legs, you don't have this kind of an asset. But it's just as important because now you're really dealing with structure rather than the physiological primary function of a function like respiration. But this structure and function combination, you can't separate them. The function of the legs is, after all, a motor function. And you're rehabilitating the motor function of those legs. The function of the chest is not basically a motor function. Unless you want to look at the movement of ribs as being a motor function, but the function that is primarily the job of the thorax is the respiratory and the heart action. And then you build in the freeing, which you have done with your hands, through a pelvic lift. And that pelvic lift is a turning down of the sacrum, a separation of the lumbar vertebrae, so that they can begin to straighten out. You have seen, and you will continue to see, short lumbars, and necessarily, if you have a short lumbar, you're going to have that reversal of the sacrum. This being the base, and this being the apex. The apex will be back, the base will be in, and the lumbars will be short. And as you lengthen the lumbars and bring them back, this has to happen. There's no way that nothing else can happen. And this is what you are accomplishing in your pelvic lift. You are organizing every one of those lumbar articulations, but particularly fourth to fifth and fifth to sacrum. And with your fingers, you are very often stretching and reorganizing the muscle in its containing fascia that overlies the sacrum. You'll find many, many sacra that feel as though they were say, is anybody down at the gate getting it open for Frank? He's down there, all right. As you go into that sacrum, you'll very often find overlays of stringy muscles, and the bone feels about like the Rock of Gibraltar. And the first thing you have to do is to get those stringy muscles with enough elasticity to allow the change in mobility. And then, in that, the cervical spine is a function, a reciprocal function of the lumbar spine. It is in accordance with the logic of the situation that you begin to organize the cervical spine and get that cervical spine lengthening, which in terms of the cervical spine also means going back. And so you suddenly find that what you have really been doing is straightening that spine from one end to the other. The guy stands up and he says, "Why, I feel so much straighter." Of course he feels straighter. He is straighter. You made him that way. He made himself that way. Because all the way along the line, you have been demanding from him the kind of movement which, as you held the muscle and the fascia, organized. He organized himself. But what you have to know is how to hold it, where to put it, what commands to give him to get him to do it. Now, the Lord has been very, very good to me this summer. Both of the classes this summer have listened and learned and said, "Now, just let your tail turn under." It has taken me almost 20 years of teaching before I got a class that would do that. Because they will all say, "Now, turn your tail under, that's right, now lift." And the first thing that happens is that guy takes his hind end and he boosts it up into the air. Because this is the only way he knows how to use his hind end. He doesn't know how to use his hind end by letting the apex turn under. And you have to teach him. And any teaching function takes time. And it takes a step-by-step understanding. And when you tell a guy, that's fine now, boost your tail up, turn your tail under. I can't tell you how many ways they can get of avoiding that little sentence, just let your tail turn under. Because if you do, let it alone, it goes back there. And I congratulate all of you. One for being so intelligent, and two for having such an intelligent teacher. Anyway. But I really mean this. You see, it is as the individual holds himself that he holds, literally holds, the lumbar spine anterior. And he has learned to do this since he was a kid. The time he first learned to do it was when he stood on his feet. And nobody could show him, or did show him, they didn't know how to show him, how to use his feet and use his knees appropriately so that his knees went forward and the other end of the leg went backward. They just said, well, Johnny, come on, here's the ball, now run after the ball. And Johnny ran and toddled as best Johnny might. And so he got a pattern of movement which got him after the ball. And this is a pattern of movement which he now identifies with success. And therefore, this is the pattern of movement which he maintains. It's what we were talking about the other day when we were talking about the feet down on the outside. Now, we better get on with this deal. So anyway, we got that cervical spine back, because we got to get on to the third hour today. So in the second hour, all of a sudden you come up hard and fast against the idea that we haven't done a darn thing about those legs below the knees. And you have seen many people in here and elsewhere who thought they were standing upright, and yet their feet and their knees had exactly no relationship whatsoever to the overlying weight. You see, you give this concept to the ordinary individual, and not to the ordinary individual, to the professionally trained individual. And he says, my God, the man's standing on his feet. Where is his weight if it isn't on his feet? But you just look at him here and tell me where they are. So now you've got to get the organization, the relation of muscles in the leg appropriate to the job of maintaining the weight of the body and to the job of moving the weight of the body. This is function for the legs. And so you get on with it. And you go down and you take a look at what is holding it immobile. And you start making that move with your toes up, foot up, toes up, toes down, foot down. The demand in every direction for movement, while you see to it that the muscle is where the muscle belongs. And this demands that you know where the muscle belongs. And this demands that you read the anatomy book. And not all anatomy books are right. But with the anatomy book, plus your mechanical intuition of how you're going, how the string is going to have to be if you're going to move the joint truly, it's easy enough to find out about this. Now there are two ends of this string. The one is the leg and the one is the foot. And in the second hour, you become more acutely aware of the problem of hinges. You have got to have appropriate hinges at the knees, appropriate hinges at the ankles, perhaps I should start the other way around, and an appropriate hinge in the foot, across the dorsum of the foot. And this dorsum of the foot hinge is something that probably not one out of this group has ever considered before. But across the dorsum of the foot, there has to be, for a normal movement, literally a hinge joint. And when that hinge is in, then you can get the lift on the outside of the foot. And until that hinge is in, you cannot really get the lift on the outside of the foot. And as long as the outside of the foot is down, as you see it is, as we looked at the normal accidental business of growing up and walking on the side of your feet the other day, as long as that outside is down, that hinge on the foot cannot operate. But that foot is just like any other part of the body. In fact, in certain respects, it's more complicated than any other part of the body. How many bones in a foot? 50 odd pounds? 72 for the two of them. I don't know, I keep forgetting about numbers. But at any rate, you see what I'm talking about. And every one of those bones has two hinges, two ends, which form a hinge, an independent little hinge. And those little bones have to fit together so that you get a big hinge, that is big in terms of those little bones, across the dorsum of the foot. And then when you have that, then you will really begin to get an ankle that really walks. Now, as you we got a visitor.
That's Richard. Daddy's processing it.
Oh. As you work with ankles, you will find, just as you work with sacra, you will find that there is a great deal of deteriorated tissue around those two joints of gristle. And those of you who did the work with the foot the other day undoubtedly was struck by the fact that in many of these ankles you find such dilapidated gristle with which that individual is trying to move his whole weight, heaven only knows how many thousand times every day. And there is nothing there to do it. So the answer is that the surrounding mobile tissue is put under too great a strain, and it begins to break down, and so you get the increase of disorganization. And you are apt to find much the same sort of thing up around the sacrum. You'll see whole areas of gristle in there. Not so much in people as young as most of the people you're dealing with, though there are some there. But along about the time that they get to be 40 and 45 and 50. For the same reason, that sacrum is having to try to support weight. It shouldn't have to. But if there's no way that the weight is going to be transmitted up and down the legs, that sacrum is going to try to support weight. And just as the body protects itself from, if weight is transmitted in the wrong, over the wrong spot on the foot, for instance, you get a callus. The body puts callus material, which is deteriorated gristly material, in there. So, if it's trying to support weight at the sacrum, it will do the same sort of thing. It'll put this callus of gristle around the bone. And you then have the job of reorganizing that gristle and making a mobile tissue of it. Now, it will reorganize. This is the odd part about it. Sometimes you have to have recourse to such a thing as a program of food supplements, so that you can get more of the material that's needed for the repair of that. It will do it slowly, gradually. It won't do it in an hour. It will rarely do it in 10 hours through. But the second time you look at it and you say, oh, by George, that's changed a lot. So you see, this whole picture and this whole patterning becomes the outward and visible picture of what happens in movement. If the movement is normal, that outward manifestation of flesh is normal. The converse is true. If the flesh is normal, the movement will be normal. Again, you have this circular bit. And so your second hour is dealing with that. And then, as you all saw, in that second hour, what was happening was that the back was looking too short. And you remember you talked about it the other day. You remember that you realized why it was too short. You were getting movement of the ribs opening out. And you weren't getting it in the back. And so there came the problem of how to lengthen the back. And you actually saw in the demonstrations here how when you brought the extensor muscles toward the position where your good common sense dictated they should go, not even the anatomy book, but your common sense, your common mechanical sense, or your mechanical common sense, said they should go, that the spine then lengthened. And then all of a sudden there was room for the individual vertebra to be able to exert some movement, each on each. And so you got to the end of the second hour. And in many of these cases, as you remember, you again gave a pelvic lift in order to again get the end of the spine turned under. Because you remember that we call this thing structural integration. And we pride ourselves on the fact that we do not send them out that door with a basic area disorganized, non-integrated. With every individual that goes out that door, what you are doing, or in theory what you are doing, is looking at them to see that their contour and their movement says that they have at that moment the best integration of function that is possible for the structure that you know they have at that moment. Now, if that pelvis is if that sacrum is turned back with the apex, the base forward and the apex back, if it has slipped off the place where you put it in the first hour, and it could very well have, because you've been doing a big reorganizing job of the legs and of the back, then you see that body is not integrated. And it's your job to integrate it. If the guy is coming in the day after tomorrow, well, it's not that urgent. You better do it anyhow so we don't forget. But if he's going away and he won't be back till 6 weeks, and maybe then he'll see another practitioner in New York or something, this you can't afford to do, because the fellow goes away and in 24 hours he has symptoms. And aside from the purely moral responsibility of the fact that you're there to make the guy better, you get the very practical consideration that he goes around and he says, oh, that guy, he doesn't know how to do this. You know, I had 3 treatments from him, and I was feeling worse at the end of the 3rd treatment than I was when I came to him. And this is what he'll say. He won't be worse, but he'll be feeling worse, you see, but he doesn't differentiate. So it's your business to know what a body looks like when it's at these various stages along the line. What level can you expect to be? And if you aren't there, whose fault is it? Is it that guy's or is it yours? It's usually yours. Once in a great while, you get a body that's so badly deteriorated or disorganized, or it's tangled with a Mack truck, or it's parachuted down and the parachute didn't open or something. And there, it'll be his fault.
We don't get many of those, do we?
You know, you'd be surprised how many you do get, because those are the people that nobody else has been able to help. I had a woman in England one time who had been in an elevator, good old English elevator, where the ropes of the elevator had broken and the elevator had fallen down 7 floors. I had a man one time who had fallen into an excavation that was, I don't know how deep, you know, for one of these big modern buildings, and he had fallen from the top down, hit on his head. Well, you're the ones that get them because nobody else fixes them. And then all of a sudden they come up against somebody who says, well, I bet I know somebody that can fix it. Now you try it. And so it goes. So now we come up against the third hour. It's now 10:30. What time is Frank coming in?
I thought it was 10:30.
Is he coming in at
A little
10:30?
bit early today.
All right.
It's really quite early.
10:20.
Yeah.
It seems to me that, you talked about how a big plus of the first hour is that you increase the person's respiration. It's a big event. And then you said that when you work on the feet and the legs, it's mainly to improve their motor function. But it seems to me that also a really big plus is that you give a tremendous boost to the circulation, since it's the motor activity of the legs
Look,
which provides the venous.
I've said to you, there's no such thing as a straight line when you're working in a biological medium. You always go around like this. And you're saying the same thing, more complicated or less abstractly. Yes, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. You're getting the oxygen where it belongs now, you see, with that change in the circulation. But the oxygen gets into the circulation in terms of the very greatly improved thoracic function.
No, I'm just talking about that it's the proper motor activity of the legs that aids the heart in pumping the blood. As I understand, that it aids greatly in the venous return. That's really...
Well, this is certainly so. But I see that as a sort of not negative addition, whereas the other one is a very positive addition.
There's also the idea that from the foot, there may be kinds of direct, very powerful connections to the internal organs from the feet.
There is no question that there is, and many of you here in this room have come into contact with these various practitioners of zone therapy.
Yeah.
And believe me, that is a powerful, wonderful technique. And it is a something you can depend on when all else is too complicated and fails.
So in a sense, what you're really doing is building up the body energy a lot by working with your feet.
I had a woman brought to me in Canada one time. She had a funny history. She had been a very serious arthritic, one of these wheelchair kinds. And she'd been in a hospital for several months. She was a youngish woman, 45, 50 maybe. She had been in a hospital for several months, and at the end of those several months, the hospital told her that they didn't want to keep her anymore. She should go home. They had done everything they could for her. She should go home. And needless to remark, this threw her into the depths of despair. And she lived in London, Ontario. And she, some little intern came up to her one day, and he says, I hear you're going home on Thursday. And she said, yes. And he says, you live in London. She said, yes. He says, well, don't say I told you this, but there is an arthritis clinic in London. Now you go to that clinic and you see if you can't get some help. A chiropractic arthritic clinic. So he didn't know the address, he just had heard of it. So lo and behold, she goes home, she goes to this arthritic clinic. And the guy gets her going. He was a man 20 years older than she, no, 50 years older than she perhaps. He gets her going and she's behaving practically normally for a year or more. Meantime, he gets the doctor there gets the idea he wants to marry her. And this throws her back right again into the arthritis and this sort of stuff. And he now can't get it out. He can't budge it. So at this point, I land up in Toronto, and this man, this doctor, saw my demonstration, and he said, I have a friend that I'd like you to work on. And I wasn't enthusiastic, but, you know, you go up there and you're telling everybody about how wonderful you are. When they say, put up or shut up, you gotta put up. So presently he brings her in, and this was demonstration material. The room was full of practitioners, chiropractors, practitioners. And I get her on that bed, and that woman is so sore that I can't lay my hands on her. Furthermore, she can't lie on a bed. I can't get her down to a floor. That was the way it started. I can't get her down to a floor because she's too sore to touch, and she couldn't lie flat on the floor anyway. So I send downstairs. This was in that big hotel in Toronto that some of you probably know. His name I forget. Biggest Dominion. And I send down for a bedboard, and by and by the bedboard comes up, and I put it on the bed, and I try to get her on the bed. And again, she's so sore that I can't touch her. And she can't lie flat. I've got her all propped up on pillows one end and pillows the other end. And now I'm really in a quandary because she's so sore, I can't touch her. And finally, I got a real bright idea. I said, I'm going down to that woman's feet. And I went down to that woman's feet, and very, very gently I worked on that woman's feet. And little and little and little and little, she lay back, she lay back, she lay back, she lay back, and just lying flat on the bed. Along about this time, she burst into tears because she had not believed, you see, that she'd ever be flat again. But this is incredible. This is incredible. All I had done was to work on that woman's feet, and it had left a whole world closed. Yeah. Do you have something, Robert?
I was just saying, when you did it, you just went to the other side of that circle.
I know.
Yeah.
I know, but why didn't somebody else think of it? Here it comes. It's like the woman I was telling you about the other day, the wife of a doctor who had had headaches for, I don't know, 3 or 5 years or something before somebody brought her in. And when the first hour cleared up her headache, because it was, after all, a cervical imbalance, the doctor said, well, that's just hypnotism. What I want to know is why he didn't hypnotize.
But ask the doctor, what's hypnotism?
I never did see it, and this story came to me. It's just hypnotism that you see going on. Yeah.
Never heard anyone explain what hypnotism was.
With the actual body of a man, which is something that has come down through 1,000,000 years. You have to sort of turn yourself backward, getting away from this kind of technological advance and trying to reproduce situations such as he developed in.
Okay. Yeah, I like that concept, but
I think this is one of the problems in our civilization, that we insist on getting our technological concepts ahead. I think it's one of our problems in our medicine. Our technological concepts get far ahead of where the body is able to accept the result. Because the body is still developing slowly onward from the technology which was available 200 years ago. This could have been done 200 years ago just as well as it can be done now. It could have been done 2,000 years ago just as well as it's being done now. What we do in this room, I mean. And I think one has to start there because these bodies have not changed.
right.
It may have been done.
I think it was done, but this is something you talk about at night and not in the morning. Okay, another lead? Yeah.
Something I talked with Fritz I wanted to bring up in the last class. What you meant, which I still don't understand, in your questions that we had to write a paper for, what you meant by intrinsic muscles.
Very, very simple. The opposite of extrinsic muscles.
I
All right, go ahead, take
I'm just going to give an example. In the foot, for example, the muscles that are located entirely within the foot are operated the joints and hinges in the foot, you see the intrinsic muscles. The muscles, say, the tibialis,
The muscles that cross a joint
across the joint.
are extrinsic muscles. Of course, in the sense in which he's using it, there are 50 or whatever number of joints in the foot, and those intrinsics are still crossing those joints. But they're not crossing with a view to large voluntary contributions. Intrinsic muscles in general are not too subject to voluntary movement. It is the extrinsic system, the outside system. Now, I can make this very much more real to you by saying the intrinsic muscles are the muscles that you take the poultry shears to cut. The extrinsic muscles are the muscles that you take the carving knife to cut. Okay. Nothing like a good homely little metaphor. But you see, the extrinsic muscles have been developed down through the development of the human being for work and for flight and for voluntary activity. The intrinsic muscles are the rather involuntary muscles, which presumably are operating on a different nervous system, which hold the structure together. Certainly within limits, a muscle which runs from here to here holds the structure together, but it doesn't hold it in the same sense that the muscles that run from here to here do. And that's what I meant by that question, and I was trying, in placing that question, I was trying to place it so that you would get to thinking about it and get to thinking about the balance that there is between these different nervous systems.
I just couldn't find any material.
I know, but that's a minor detail.
That was right.
Well,
but,
that's a minor detail, and the more people get frustrated about not finding material, the sooner there will be material to be found. Now, Rosemary, for instance, really got herself stuck on that question about fascia. And she went to the library up there in Berkeley, and she spent 2 full days trying to get some information about fascia. And she got about 2 paragraphs worth of information. Now, as I say, the more people the more of us get frustrated about that, the sooner there will be material available about fascia.
I went to see my old physiology instructor and asked her about it, and she said, gee, I've never heard of it. Actually, there's never anything wrong with the fascia.
This is it. Now, you see, 100 years ago, 100 years ago, it used to be that when the surgeons opened the abdominal cavity, they would take the whole gut and they'd simply take it out and lay it next door, so while they operated on something or other, and then nobody recognized that that gut was an infinitely complicated working part of the body. And it wasn't until the days of Claude Bernard, which was in the 90s, the late 90s. Some of you heard me tell this story, that Claude Bernard was given the Medal of Honor for his work in physiology. And so, naturally, he had to give a speech when he accepted it. And he got to his 2 feet. And he said, "Gentlemen, a man is a something built about a gut." And this was the first time anybody had ever enunciated an idea like this, believe it or not, or the first time in that immediate time period. And I don't need to tell you the extent to which this attitude has changed at this point, all deriving from Mr. Claude Bernard, who decided that a man was something built about a gut. Now, the Gospel according to Rolf says something different. The Gospel according to Rolf says that a man is a something built around a line. And I don't think we can dissect out the line. We can push the line around. We can break the line. We can fragment the line. But we can't dissect it out. And this is just the difference that's happened to ideas, really, in 100 years. Going back from that to that intrinsic and extrinsic muscle business, I would like to present one of my problems, one of my long-time problems here, and it may be that some of you might, by accident, come up with an answer. In the 40s, almost 30 years ago, there was a paper that appeared, and I don't know whether it appeared in a journal or whether it was some little separate publication from some little separate group. The group, however, was a group here in Southern California, and I'm not dead sure, but that the men were osteopaths. And they were considering the matter of intrinsic versus extrinsic muscles, whether in those particular words, I no longer remember. And they said that in their opinion, the intrinsic muscles were innervated by the autonomic system, you see. That they were differentiating it in not merely sympathetic versus central, but within the autonomic system they were differentiating. I must be wrong on that.
Autonomic versus somatic?
No. Sympathetic versus parasympathetic.
Parasympathetic.
Yeah, but you can't, this isn't true because in the hands you don't get parasympathetic. But at any rate, they called attention to the fact, you see, that these muscles are going to be differently innervated from these muscles.
There's an interesting thing about that, as a matter of fact. There's one, and this is sort of, I mean, basically that probably can't be true. But there is some evidence, for example, that palm or skin resistance, only in the palms and in the feet, which are where there are many, of course, intrinsic muscles. There's a very good correlation between the resistance and the amplitude of the alpha rhythm in the brain, which probably has an autonomic balance.
This is very interesting.
This is not true anywhere else, except in those areas of high intrinsic muscle.
Well,
But
what
that
you're bringing up is a very interesting speculative idea. Why is it that in the soles of the feet you're getting reflexes to the whole of the body?
Yeah, exactly. This is the thing that
And undoubtedly there are also reflexes in the hand, but you can't find them because the hands are always moving so much that they won't allow these little points of immobility to form, I imagine. But you're bringing up a very interesting speculative idea. Now, if ever any of you happen to run across a lead going back to here, I would be very much interested in getting it, because I think that this is part of the story of what we are doing. We are balancing, you see, these different components of the nervous system. And I think some of the problems that are in the modern world are due to the vast imbalance. Eddie came in here last night with a very interesting story. A young man came into him for processing, first hour processing. He was down at the baths. Eddie, I presume, was working in one of the massage rooms there. And as this guy stood before him, he almost had a puddle of sweat around him. He was literally dripping sweat. And Eddie took a towel and wiped him off, and it didn't stay wiped. And Eddie said to him, do you always sweat so much? And he says, yes. And so Eddie took and did the first half of the body. And lo and behold, the whole half of the body, from the head right on down to the feet, one half was dry and the other was still dripping. And you see, you have got to account for situations like that. And you can, if you get deep enough down into the physiology of the nervous system. Actually, I'd never heard a story like that, and I was glad to have Eddie's little contribution to oddities. So anyway, let's get, yeah.
I was just thinking, it's not only an autonomic balance that one's dealing with, a sympathetic, parasympathetic balance, but there's certainly a somatic autonomic balance also. And that's possibly what was affected.
Well, I was interested in it at the time that I saw this article. It rang a bell, and that bell has never stopped ringing, but I was too darn dumb. In fact, in those days, you didn't have Xeroxes on every corner, so it wasn't possible to get copies. I was too darn dumb to make the effort to get it, but I was interested because at that time I was doing a lot of work on spastic children. And you see, the spastic is in trouble because of one nervous system not balancing the other. And what I was trying to find out was how I could stimulate that nervous system to balance the other.
About 25 years ago, a physiologist named Freeman did experiments where he measured autonomic somatic balance and he found that people who were spastic and uncoordinated were very off balance in that reactivity.
There was no question about that.
That's something.
But the thing that was interesting me at that time, I had a couple of little spastic little ones. And I was, this was just very early on in this work, and I didn't have recipes worked out and all this sort of thing. And what I was trying to find out was, how could I approach these little ones and expect to get an immediate change? And that's why this has stayed in my mind all these years. Now, here's a nice little project for you.
Another one. I got the last one here. Okay, what is it?
Collect at least references,
Yeah, okay.
as many as possible, to this point of view of the balance between nervous elements in the body.
Okay,
There's a lot of work being done now on,
by Gellhorn.
on control of the autonomic nervous system.
Yes, this I know, but I don't see that any of it
That's really
talks.
not.
It doesn't talk to us.
That's really classical,
Classical physiology.
even though it upsets all of the theories. It's still, but this guy Gellhorn got some interesting stuff.
Because what I would like to do is to get all of this material together and get into one place the kind of material that is significant to what we are doing here, so that we have a textbook for structural integration. And that you don't have to go to heaven knows how many sources. The student doesn't have to go. If they'll really get themselves thoroughly informed in what is indicated in that text, they will have enough to put into the background of general physiology and give them a way of thinking that will lead them further, for preparation for a research project.
I'll do some work on that. I'll get.
Well, you see, if you know the problem is there, when things come under your eyes that have to do with it, you
I
may
have
know.
actually a file, I think,
That
that
big,
pertain to
yeah,
this.
I'm
sure.
At least we can copy a file, and put it out as a file for
Maybe I'll abstract
ambitious
some of the
Rolf.
things.
Maybe you'll what?
Abstract some of the articles.
Yeah, this would be wonderful. This would be wonderful, and it would be wonderful for you to just publish 3-sentence long abstracts in the bulletin, so that among the practitioners, those of them who have interest and background to do that, can see whether this is where they want to go or whether it's somewhere else. Okay?
Okay, I promise to give you some stuff on that.
And this, you see, if you and down between you could get one 2 or 3 page long article 4 times a year in the bulletin, it would help a lot of people to extend their concepts. Okay, now, today is the day when we begin applying third hour work and first hour work. Now, in view of what we have just been talking about today, this hour, does that first hour begin to take on additional dimensions? You see, there is nobody that says, that I know of, that gives you definite information about how fascial sheaths are innervated, but they certainly are innervated. What nervous system supplies them? I don't think that there may be a lot of information around about this, but I'm more inclined to think that, like with that teacher of physiology, there's never anything wrong with the fascia, so you don't need to know anything about it.
We're getting the literature searched, and we'll see.
I understand this, but I'm
I don't know.
trying to do a job to point out the fact that this is terra incognita in which we're walking. And our service has to be to make a map as well as to develop the territory. And you see, as I say, there is no information available, but it is possible, it is highly possible, that some of this balance of this fascia that we do in the first hour, this balancing of the superficial fascia, has to do with a balancing of the nervous system, these two nervous systems. People so many times come to me, relatively informed laymen. Well, I have had a low basal metabolism for 25 years. Of course, you don't do anything for the thyroid. Well, what's the answer to that? You lay them down, and inside of 5 minutes, you begin to see that flush of skin reaction, saying that the glands of the skin are awakened, as they used to say in yoga. They're awakened, they're doing their job. Now, those glands are again on one nervous system circuit, and it's not the same nervous system circuit as the nervous system that goes to the deltoid. It's got to be the autonomic. And if you're going to get better activity in that autonomic system, there isn't anything that's going to be on that autonomic innervation that isn't going to get stimulation, that isn't going to get, as I say, as the yoga people say, awakened. It's impossible. And you will find people who will say to you, I've had a low basal metabolism for 25 years, and if you get a basal metabolism made at the end of, say, the 4th hour, their basal metabolism has changed very drastically. Sometimes it's even normalized. Not always, but it always changes drastically, period. And this you have seen. You don't need measures for it. You've seen it all through the people that you've seen processed, and the difference in the way they work and they act and they look and they feel and they attack problems and so forth. You don't need measures for this, but it's just as well to know how to talk about them. So that looked at from this point of view, you begin to get another perspective on that first hour. You begin to get a perspective of, we are not merely balancing the fascia, which we are, but we are beginning to balance functions of communication in the body. You see, we're going to take on a lot of first hours today. This is going to review the actual technique, but it's also going to give you a time to look at those first hours and see what is happening to those bodies with from a different perspective, from a different angle from what you looked at them last week. This is one of the reasons why we do it this way and sort of keep a lot of review material coming up from behind. Now, in terms of your 3rd hour work, you have now gotten, you see, in the 1st hour, you have started on the outside of that body and done a pretty good job all around, permitting the pelvis to become more mobilized within the envelope of the flesh. And this is the sort of thing that you saw so plainly on Sharon, where you could see that pelvis waving in the breeze inside the envelope. But there was no proper span of the envelope to keep the pelvis from waving in the breeze inside of it. And so, as I say, in that 1st hour, we have gone toward the goal of making the pelvis more horizontal, organizing it on top of the legs in order that it may be horizontal. And then in the 2nd hour, realizing that except we connected that pelvis up to the floor through the action of the ankle joint, we were not getting anywhere. And those of you who were real smart realized that not only must you get movement in the ankle joint, but you must get movement in the foot. And as I usually express it in this room, you must get hinged joints, horizontal hinged joints. And you get the first and the lowest one across the dorsum of the foot. Sometimes it's pretty hard to get in. It's always easier to get movement in the ankle joint because they have had, if they're going to be mobile at all and walking at all, they've got to have movement in that ankle no matter how poor it is or how distorted it is. They've got to move at the ankle. But they don't have to move at the dorsum of the foot. They can walk around that joint. They don't walk very well, but nevertheless they move. And they're never aware of the fact that they ought to be walking better. Because as far as they're concerned, this is a foot, is a foot, is a foot, and it's my foot, and therefore it's a normal foot. This isn't so. Your first joint is across the dorsum of the foot. Your 2nd joint is at the ankle. And both of them have to be operational before you can start getting operational joints, properly operational joints at the knee and at the hip, and then start up the spine. You see, it's an absurdly simple concept. Days later,